All right, next game, the Great Dane. This game was played August 16th, 1958. It was the 8th round of the event. Jorgen Bent Larsen. He just went by Bent Larsen. He was born March 4th, 1935, and became an IM at the age of 19, and he became a Grandmaster 2 years later. Larsen was a 6-time Danish chess champion, and he's one of only 3 players ever to win 3 interzonals. The other 2 were Vasily Smyslov and Mikhail Tal, both of whom became world champions. For Larsen's other tournament achievements, he won at Havana in 1967, at Winnipeg, at Palma de Mallorca, all in 1967. He had tournament victories at Monte Carlo in 68, Palma de Mallorca 69, Teesside 72, Hastings 72-73. He won at Geneva in 77, Buenos Aires in 79. That Buenos Aires tournament was an enormous 3-point margin. He also won in 1980 at Buenos Aires. And in 1983, he came second only to Garry Kasparov at the Nixich tournament. It was a super tournament. He won at Reykjavik in 1985. He tied for first place at the 1985 Nimzovich Memorial Tournament. By the way, in 1993, Bent Larsen defeated the Deep Blue computer 2.5 to 1.5. He passed away in Buenos Aires on September 9th, 2010. He was 75. Bobby with E4, C5 is the Sicilian defense. Knight F3, D6, D4, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn. An open variation, knight F6, knight C3, G6 is your hyper-accelerated dragon. Bishop E3, bishop G7, pawn F3 is the Yugoslav attack. Castles, queen D2, knight C6, bishop C4, knight takes knight on D4. That is the main line dragon variation. Bishop takes knight. Bishop E6 is Czerniak's variation. Moshe Czerniak lived from February 3rd, 1910 to August 31st, 1984. He was a Polish-Israeli chess player who became an international master in 1952. He was Israeli chess champion in 36 and 38. In 1939, he was Jerusalem champion. In 41, he won at Quilmes. In 44 and 48, he won at Buenos Aires. In 51, he won at Vienna, which was the 4th Schlechter Memorial Tournament. In 51, he won at Reggio Emilia. In 1955, he once again became Israeli champion. And in 1965, he won at Netanya. These days, the yearly chess festival at Tel Aviv is named after Czerniak. This is Czerniak's variation, bishop E6. Bishop B3, queen A5, queenside castle, B5, now king B1. B4 hits the knight, and knight D5. Bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop. Now, pawn takes bishop is superior because it precludes black's E-man from coming to E6. And on pawn takes pawn, black would play something like queen B5 and likely queen D3 to trade queens. And of course, if that trade is made, you have this position. Coming back, Bobby captured with his bishop. Now, here I was surprised by queen's rook to C8. And the bot does not like it. It's going to lose a pawn and cede an advantage to Fischer. Knight takes bishop is the move suggested by the bot, which would result in pawn takes knight, queen takes the pawn, queen takes the B-pawn, and then you can bring your rook into the game. Well, probably better to bring the king's rook over to keep some strength here. All right, back. Queen's rook to c8 from Bent Larsen, the Great Dane. Bishop back to b3 and rook to c7, no doubt intending to double his rooks on the c file. Knight d7 has the idea of knight c5. Rook c7 is what was played. Pawn h4 gets a star, with h5 coming next, or perhaps pawn to g4. Even queen to g5 is facilitated by this move. I did have this idea in my head of a3. Notice that the queen is undefended and in line with our queen, which means the b-man is pinned. And what do you do to a pinned piece? You attack it. I get an inaccuracy there. But that was my idea. The bot completely unimpressed with my idea. So anyway, h4 does get the star, and deservedly so. Queen b5 gets out of the pin. Pawn h5, king's rook to c8 as expected. Now, probably not. Maybe you can maintain an equal position by taking the pawn, but it's awfully risky. In fact, it gets a question mark. Oh, it gets a double question mark. Oh, yeah, because, well, first of all, you're opening this file. It's not wise. Probably just take here. Yes. And you'd pretty much have to take with the king. You don't want to take with the knight because then you get this battery on the H file and it's all over. So that'd be compelled. Right, and G4's coming. So yeah, that's just lost, isn't it? Boom. Okay, so rook fc8 is the right move. Bobby opens the file with pawn takes pawn. Maybe h6 is still advantageous, but on principle, you want to open that h file. Let's see what it gets. Okay, it still gets a star. To me, that would be harder to play because the entire point is to break open the king's position. After this, though, the point of h6 is so that you can play bishop takes here, and you really bust things up. And, okay, maybe even queen d5 here, forcing a queen trade. That would be playable. Obviously, much more aggressive is Bobby's move, and that also gets a star. Pawn takes the pawn. Now g4. And so g4 clears the second rank. So white's really pushing. I also had this idea of bishop e3 here with the idea of bishop h6. I get an exclam. Oh, boy. That's like giving a kid a lollipop and then snatching it out of his hand and throwing it down. Well, it doesn't close the file, though. The file is still open. Oh, the f-pawn's pinned anyway. But even if he could, the file would still be open, wouldn't it? There's still nothing in the way of the rook. But the f-man is pinned anyway. All right, so h takes g4 here, discovering access to the h2 square from the queen. a5. And of course, our bishop has no safe where to go, so he's threatening. This is a pretty reasonable move in my mind, but the threat is h4 here. I mean a4. g5 hits the knight, knight h5, and on tracer's cue, we have rook takes knight. Double exclam. Accessing h7. But more importantly, it lures the black G-man, because obviously he's got to capture back. It lures the black G-man off of his square so that our own G-man can press forward and exploit that pin that I mentioned a moment ago. I also have ideas of queen f4. So look at the piece coordination enjoyed by white here. Well, for that reason, I'd be inclined to play bishop takes bishop here. Twice the Ficklebot started me out with an exclam and then took it back. Well, what's the point of this move? That's the real question. The point of this move is that he's hoping white will go for that queen f4 that I mentioned, but now that would actually be blunderous because then e6 and his problems are solved. Instead, I'm playing queen takes the bishop, threatening the mate on h8, and I get a double exclam for that. Thank you. It's about time I got some respect. I felt like Rodney Dangerfield for a moment. And of course, if pawn takes the rook, I'm playing g6, and even if you attack here, double exclam. Now I'm playing queen d2. Well, actually, yeah, because now he'll play another double exclam. Wow, I got 3 double exclams in one sideline. Well, the whole point is black just barely squirms his way out of there. Well, so it's about time, because a minute ago it was giving me exclams and taking them back and saying, nah, just kidding, you're inaccurate. All right, coming back. That is one man's opinion, but G takes H5 does get the approval of the bot. Now G6, of course. Well, now bishop takes bishop is critically essential, in my opinion. You've got to decoy this queen to keep it from playing to H6, and so bishop takes bishop is necessary. Instead, he played E5, and sure enough, the bot confirms that bishop takes bishop is the necessary move. Now, after bishop takes bishop, white would surely, well, you could play queen takes bishop, or you could simply take here with check. I get a star for the check. We'll come back to queen takes bishop in a moment. But here, just move, the king would have to move over here. Well, maybe you could play king f8. On queen takes bishop, you'd have to once again play rook c4 to interfere with the white bishop. Another double exclam. Right, well, I mean, the point is you have to obstruct this attacker. So even though it's a double exclam, it's a fairly easy one to make. Remember, white has already sacrificed the exchange, so black has material to give back. Rodko Lordzon is also a brother in Christ, by the way. Got a lot of believers in the channel. It's always nice. All right, so E5 here. G takes F7, check. Okay, maybe G takes F7 is unnecessary, but note that it removes black's control of E6, making it available for white. But it also allows black some counterplay, I suppose, with rook takes the pawn. So I guess queen G5 is better because it takes a very aggressive posture on the G file number 1. And perhaps then we could back it up with our rook on G1, or perhaps even in some lines we can simply sidestep our queen to F5, depending on the need. Bobby going ahead with pawn takes the pawn check, and surprisingly Larson does not play rook takes pawn, he plays king f8. You're giving back the exchange, but I'll play bishop e3 since your rook is pinned, and go ahead and force me to give up my bishop for your rook. I can live with that. Let's go back. King f8 from Bent Larsen. Now bishop to e3 here. Pawn d5. Pawn takes pawn. Note you don't want to play queen takes pawn here. That would be a bad idea because on queen takes queen, we get bishop takes queen, and ladles and jelly spoons, all of a sudden, the position is equalized. With rook takes the pawn here, hitting this backward pawn, you've got to go ahead and take the exchange. And it's rook bishop against rook bishop with only a one pawn advantage, hardly sufficient. So e takes is the right way to go. Rook does take f7 here. Pawn a4 right away is the best move, or at least his best chance. But you can see the eval bar, he doesn't have any good moves. He really doesn't. In fact, okay, so maybe you're hoping that he plays bishop h6. I guess that's the point. Black hopes, and this is the wrong move, for bishop h6. Look at that eval bar. And of course, the point is now after pawn takes the bishop on b3, and bishop takes the bishop on g7, king doesn't take the bishop, king takes the pawn. If you play king takes the bishop, then rook g1 and you're busted again. So king takes the pawn is the move. But after pawn takes the pawn, double exclam, wow. Rook c2 hitting the queen. If queen g5, then we play queen e2. And white is compelled to take a repetition because checkmate's being threatened, isn't it? You've got, if it were black to move, it would be checkmate with check, check, come back, and then the queen comes over for checkmate. So white would be compelled to take the repetition here. We'd have to give queen e6 check. Yeah, like this, and then just go back and forth. But, so that would be black's hope. But obviously, we're not going to play that. We'll play this. Bada bing, bada boom. Oh, yeah! After pawn takes the bishop, pawn takes the rook. Bada bing, bada boom, etc. Okay, let's go back. Rook takes f7 was the choice played by Larson, and d6 is played here anyway. And now I think bishop h6 can be played on the or a subsequent turn. Oh yeah, so that's why he played rook f6 here, to prevent that. So bishop g5 hits the rook, and Larson, desperate, says, okay, go ahead and take the rook. I'll have to defend here. So Bobby does, and then bishop takes. Now d7, and remember what I've told you about these pawns. When they cross into enemy territory, they gain in value. It goes from a 1-point pawn to a 2-point pawn to a 4-point pawn to a 6-point pawn to a 9-point pawn called a queen. Oh, yeah. Larson blockaded, but after queen d6 check, he resigned. Note the bishop's control here, the pawn's control here, the queen's control here. So the only, well, I guess he could block here, but then queen h6 is a Bowden's checkmate, sort of. So you'd have to play king g7. That's pretty slick checkmate, though, I'll tell you. And now I'll slide over with check. And after king h7, I will play queen takes the bishop, threatening the magic square checkmate. If you take the pawn defending the magic square, queen g6 check, forces the king to h8, and ladles and jelly spoons, we're going to get you one way or the other. Take the pawn check, queen must interpose. Take the pawn check, queen must interpose. And that is checkmate. Oh, yeah.